All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is backups. Before I get into it, I will begin by stating that any recommendations made in regards to backups are simply that, recommendations. Ultimately, it's going to be up to your office how you would like to secure and back up your patient data, and we're just simply presenting what we find to be the most secure and reliable methods to do so. So in your office, you may have a backup system set up that is totally independent of MacPractice. A very common one is going to be Time Machine. And Time Machine is great along with other similar software, and it's going to be great for backing up your entire hard drive. However, we're still going to strongly recommend setting up direct MacPractice backups in addition to any other backups you may have in place. This is going to be due to the fact that Time Machine, for example, is going to be making sort of a snapshot sense of a backup. And the best way to ensure that your patient data is backed up in a secure and a usable manner is directly through a MacPractice backup file. Furthermore, a MacPractice backup file is going to be the most efficient way to restore your database in the unlikely event if something were to happen to your server computer and you have to turn, for example, one of your workstations into a temporary server. So here at MacPractice, we recommend setting up a minimum of 2 automatic backups, one to the internal hard drive and then one to an external hard drive. We don't have any specific recommendations for external hard drives. That is entirely up to your office, which external hard drive you would like to use. The only recommendation we make is to make sure that it is formatted for Macs and not for PCs. Otherwise, it will not work properly. Um, So in order to set up your MacPractice backups, you will have to be on the server computer. The preferences that we will look at will only be accessible on the server. So in order to access those preferences, we'll go to MacPractice up in the top menu bar, go to Preferences, and then in the sidebar within the window that populates, we will scroll down to Server Backup here. I'll expand this window so we can see the entirety of it. So this table right here in the center is going to show you all of the automatic backups that you have set up. There are going to be some columns within it, and I will go over those real quick. So first, you're going to have a column that tells you whether the automatic backup that you have set up is actually enabled and is currently in use. Next, you're going to have the source. So this determines exactly what you are backing up. You have a few different options. You can choose to only back up the database, in which case this is going to be just like the demographic information. You also have the option to only back up the attachments. So this is just going to be your patient attachments, essentially. Typically, I would recommend to just set this to all so that it backs up both of those for you. Next to that, we're going to have the backup path, and this is going to be where the MacPractice backup files are actually being saved. The default location here for the internal is going to be to library MacPractice backups. Here you're going to have the max backups here, and this is basically telling you how many backups it is going to keep writing to this specific location. I recommend setting a maximum number of backups no matter what. Otherwise, if there is no number in here at all, it is going to continue to run backups infinitely and take up a lot of your hard drive storage space and make your computer run a lot slower. Um, the number of maximum backups that I will typically see is kind of a wide range because there's so many variables to go into it. A couple of those being one, the amount of available space on your hard drive, and then also the size of your backups. So that will greatly determine how many maximum backups you'd like. I typically see a range between 5 and 25. So I would generally recommend at least 5. The sweet spot I usually see is around 10 or so. But again, that's entirely up to your office how you would like to determine how that's set up. Also, you have the days in which you would like it to run here. So if your office has sort of a typical hours of operations, if they're open like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, for example, you'll likely just want to keep it simple and set these to run Monday through Friday. It would be a bit redundant to run it for Saturday or Sunday if you aren't entering any new information into MacPractice at that point. So you can simply just have those unhighlighted. Next, you're going to have the time, and this is going to indicate what time the backups will actually begin to run. Um, Obviously, you're going to want to make sure that this is during a time where no one is going to be on the computers using MacPractice and everyone's out of the office. So if I'm in the case where my office closes at 5 every night, I will probably want to set that for later in the night, such as 10 p.m. like I have here. Another thing that you can do, if you want to add an additional backup, you can just press the plus button here, or if you want to remove one, you can highlight the backup and press the minus button here as well. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this one actually, and I'll go ahead and create a new one just to show how that looks. So as you can see, creating a new line item here. I have it enabled, I have my source set to all, and here's the backup path. So in the case of, for example, you're wanting to set up your external automatic backup, what you can do is if you double click on the backup path, it's going to bring up a window here, which will then is essentially a finder window, which you can then, if you scroll down to devices, you can find that flash drive or that external hard drive, select it, and then choose whichever folder if you just want to put it onto the drive in general, hit open, and then it will save that location there. Again, you'll want to make sure to put a maximum amount of backups here. We'll just do 10 just for simplicity. And then let's say in this case, my office is only open Monday through Friday. There's no need for me to run a backup on Saturday or Sunday. That'll just take up more space on my hard drive, make my computer run slower. So there's not much need for it. So I will just unselect those. And then here for the time, I will recommend that if you have multiple automatic backups running each night, that you actually stagger the times in which they begin. That way they don't conflict with each other, because if you have two backups running at the same time, sometimes they can have some sort of confliction there. So I will recommend we could set this maybe to 3 a.m. So that way it gives this internal backup path an ample amount of time to finish and do what it needs to do. Below here, you do have an option to run a manual backup if you would like. You just select this backup button and it will pop up that Finder window again and allow you to select where you would like to save that backup file to. And then you click Save Backup and then it will begin to run that backup. One thing to keep in mind though is that when you have that manual backup or an automatic backup running, you will not be able to use MacPractice in the process because it's writing over that information. And then also people will need to be logged out of MacPractice. Don't attempt to force quit or anything while the backup is running, otherwise your backup will fail. So to kind of segue into backup failures and whatnot, there's actually a report that we can run that will show us if backups are running successfully, if they're failing, or if they're not running at all. So I'll go ahead and show that to you really quick. We're going to go over to our reports, go to the management folder, and then we have the backups report right here. So you do have an option for a date range to run if you just wanted to show, for example, if we just wanted to do what we've seen so far at the beginning of the month. You can leave the end date open if need be. And you also have the option for when the report is ran to see it in a certain amount of size. I typically do gigabytes because I think that's just the most common and easy to look at. You can hit apply. And then here you can look at your different backups. You will have a line item for each backup that was ran. It'll give you the date and the time. It'll tell you whether it was successful or not, if it was a manual or automatic backup, any description regarding it, the IP address from which it was ran. It'll also tell you the size, the compressed size, and the specific backup path where it is running. And also, if it were to fail, it will have a reason for failure here, so you can actually assess what it is. So a lot of times it may say that it's due to insufficient space. So then that would give you an idea that, hey, maybe we need to clear that out every once in a while. One thing I'd like to touch upon really quick that I forgot to mention is when you are running your backups here, one thing I forgot to mention, so with the maximum backups, what it's essentially doing is it's going to run the 10 backups, and then when that 11th backup runs, it's going to then overwrite the oldest backup. So then essentially it's just going to keep the 10 most recent backups. One thing that I will recommend for offices in the cases in which you would be audited or you need to see how MacPractice looked or your data looked from a specific point in time, that to always take a backup out of that file, or excuse me, out of that folder, grab that backup file and move it to another location. I would recommend to do this maybe once a year. Grab the one from the last year, whether that be the 31st or whatever date in December that may be, just so you have a record of what your database looked like at that time. In the cases, again, for auditing, or if you just need to see how that looked. Because since MacPractice is a live software and is cumulative, it's constantly updating, you won't necessarily be able to get that snapshot again unless you were to do that. Another thing I'd like to mention is that it is important to make sure that your system preferences are set so that your computer isn't going to sleep at night. The reason why this may be is because if you have the hard drive going to sleep, it is going to prevent the backup from performing. So the way you can check that is by going up to the Apple menu and then going to System Preferences. And then if you go over to Energy Saver, this might look a bit different depending on the operating system you have because the options will be a bit different, but you have options, at least on mine, where you can choose between the display sleeping and the computer sleeping. And the computer sleeping is the one we're mostly worried about. The display is simply just the output. It's what you see. It's just the screen. The computer is what we're more worried about. So you want to make sure you have any options unchecked that, for example, would put hard disk to sleep when possible. You also want to check if in the schedule, if it's set to go to sleep during any times that may conflict with that backup time that you have set in the MacPractice preferences. Just a couple things to check upon if you are having some issues with backups not running at all. This would be the first place that you would want to check. All right, so one other thing I want to go over, I apologize, is going to be within the MacPractice preferences here. Within the server backup, you do have the option to set an encryption password here. This is something that I wanted to mention. This is to keep your patient data more secure so that it cannot be viewed without knowing what that password is. So MacPractice will not keep that password on file. That is something that is completely personal to your office. So if you do choose to set an encryption password, you will want to keep that in a safe, secure place. So you can set that to whatever you would like it to be. And that is just an added layer of protection for your backups if you would choose to put that on there. All right, so that's pretty much all I have to talk about in regards to backups. Next, I'd like to segue into talking about fee schedules and updating those. So you will access your fee schedules by going to the references ability, and then towards the top, there will be a folder titled fee schedules. And a fee schedule is essentially a list of your procedures and other fees that you charge in the office. So what you can do, a lot of offices towards the end of the year will update these either in bulk or they'll look at certain charges and want to update them individually. You would be able to do that here. So what you can do is you expand and then you will find your specific fee schedule. How offices use fee schedules is a little bit different depending on your office. Some offices may just have one fee schedule, some have multiple, some may use them for each insurance company. It's really entirely up to the office how they utilize these. We just kind of have some sample sort of basic default ones here that we'll mess with. So I'll just click on the dental fee schedule, for example. Here you're going to have a second like sidebar window essentially where you can search by the code or the description to find a code, or you can just scroll through and find it. And if you want to update a singular code manually, you can simply just go to that code and then you can just update the unit fee here. However, a lot of times offices will want to update these in bulk and raise the prices or lower them, whatever it may be, in bulk by a certain percentage or dollar amounts. So that's something that we will actually do with a database utility, which is in the manager's ability. However, before we do that, I want to go over some setup that I think is really beneficial before we do that. So the first thing that I like to do before we just update this fee schedule right here, what I recommend offices do is they actually make a duplicate of the fee schedule. So you can do that by going up to edit and then going to duplicate record. And as you can see, it made a copy of my fee schedule. And then what I'm going to do here for these purposes is I know this is the fees that I use for 2019. This is their prices. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just put 2019 or name it whatever makes most sense for your office. Go ahead and save that. And then what I'll do is I'll go to this one here. Must have had a bit of difficulty there. Just to move on with that, we'll just go ahead and don't save. I think I may have had that from a prior presentation. My apologies. But anyway, the idea that what I would recommend is to name that one 2019. And then what you can actually do is you can go into here and excuse me, let me backtrack a bit. Going to our original one. So this is not the copy, this is the original one. I would then title this 2020 because or whatever it may be, because this is the one we're actually going to update eventually, and then we can save that one. And then what I actually do, there we go, is I will go ahead and actually archive the copy that I just made. You can totally choose to leave it around if you'd like to, but just so that it's not in the way when you're trying to set a fee schedule and a charge or whatever it may be, I will actually recommend to archive this. And you may be wondering, why did we just create that and then archive it? It's simply just to keep it out of the way, and we can actually retrieve this. And the reason why I recommend doing this prior to making any updates is so that that way you do have a record that is accessible that shows you exactly what the fees were that you were charging for that specific year. So again, in the case of an audit or whatever it may be, if you just need to refer and see with a clear record what they used to be priced at, you can access that. So I'll go ahead and archive that. And if I ever need to access that record or that fee schedule again, I would go up to File, Retrieve Archived, and then I would go to Fee Schedules. And there's the one that I had made earlier. And then you can go ahead and select whichever one it may be and then unarchive it, bring it back and then refer to it, look at the information you need to, and then re-archive it again if need be. So that's the setup that I was speaking on there. So to actually change these in bulk, we will go ahead and navigate to the manager's ability. And then it will be a database utility here. Database utilities, if you're not familiar with those, are going to be tools within MacPractice where you can change different data sets within your database in bulk. So for example, we do have some database utilities here where we can raise or lower our fee schedule, our unit fees by a dollar amount or a percentage amount. So it's going to be changing all the fees across a fee schedule in bulk. So if you may not see these at the moment, that is because these are only going to be available for use on the server computer. Since it is working directly with your database, it can only be done on the server where that data is housed. So the ones we're going to be looking at here are going to be the raise and lower fee schedule here. Another thing I will mention here is that you should always perform a backup before running any database utility. This is going to be because there is no back or undo button for these database utilities. So if you update something in bulk and you decide you don't want to do that, there's not really a way to go back unless if you were to have a backup from prior. Another thing to keep in mind is when you are running these database utilities, you want everyone to be logged out of MacPractice aside from obviously yourself on the server. This is to prevent any sort of data loss or anything. If someone were to be in an account that would be affected by one of these database utilities being ran, we wouldn't want anyone to be in an account or making any changes to data. Because of these stipulations that I mentioned, I will typically recommend that offices run these in the morning, because if you have that automatic backup set from the night before, that can constitute as your backup that was performed if there has been no data entered since it was ran. And then also it'll probably be the best time to run it, maybe like a few minutes before you guys open, just because at that time you probably won't have anyone logged into MacPractice, or be the easiest time to have people be logged out, I should say. So you do have a couple options here. We'll go over both of these. The option to raise or lower it by a dollar amount is pretty straightforward. You're going to have an option here to raise or lower. You will choose all fees in the fee schedule, and it'll allow you to choose which fee schedule you are updating here. And then you have the option to raise it by a specific dollar amount and also the cent amount as well. This one right here is going to allow you to raise or lower it by a percentage here. Again, you choose raise or lower, choose your fee schedule you are updating, and then you have the option to raise it by a specific percentage as well. So it doesn't have to be a whole number. If it's something a bit more specific that works for your office, you can also put that in there as well. You do have a few options down here for how you would like that to divvy out. You can have the option to not round it at all, so you have a very set percentage raise. You also do have the option to round to the nearest dollar or round up to the nearest dollar as well. So rounding to the nearest dollar will simply, if it's closer to, say if it's like $75.32, it'll round it down to 75 even. If it's 75.62, it'll round it to 76 if you were to choose that option. And then rounding up will just simply move it up to the nearest dollar. So that's how you would then update your fee schedules. Next, I want to tie that into supercodes. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate back to my references ability. And we have the supercode folder right here. So supercodes are pretty nice and useful if you are an office where you see patients come in a lot of times for the same repeated thing, or if oftentimes you will bill out codes together in sort of like a bundle. So this will save you time where you can basically consolidate all of them into a singular supercode and then use that as the one instead of putting in each and every code manually. I won't go too much over these. The main reason I wanted to tie this in is because if we were to archive the original fee schedule that we were talking about prior, you would lose all of the associations and ties with one, the fee schedule as it's set on the patient accounts, and also with your supercodes. So it's one thing to keep in mind here as well as that you're preserving your supercodes when you do this updating here. So you have some options here to name the supercode, and then this is what you're going to search in the charge to pull up the set procedure codes that you have. You can add a description as well, choose which fee schedule they are pulling this information from. And then like with other areas in Mac practice, you can go ahead and add with a green plus button or remove with a red minus, and you can add your fees here. So then when you go in to create a charge, if I type in the supercode AP, it's going to pull up all three of these codes for me so I don't have to put in each one manually.